Welcome everybody if you've joined us at 5:30, Monday the 11th of May, and we're going to have a look, as I say, at Martin Luther King on behalf of St Michael at the Northgate Church in Oxford. You may know lots about Martin Luther King. We may know very little. I hope some of what we will say maybe is of interest wherever we are on that spectrum of knowledge. He was born in 1929 and he came to the attention of the world, but first of all America and first of all Montgomery, Alabama, when in 1st of December 1955, Rosa Parks, a black lady, was told to move back down the bus, and she wouldn't, and she was arrested. Martin Luther King was a fairly recently arrived pastor in the church in the town. He was only 26, and the senior black pastors realized here was a moment when they could take on the bus company, take on the local authority, and even throughout the southern states of the United States, make a big point about racism. But the senior, more experienced black pastors weren't quite sure they wanted to lead this boycott. They knew they were going for a bus boycott. They didn't particularly want to be the public figurehead of it. And so Martin Luther King, at age 26, was slightly pushed into the presidency of the Montgomery Improvement Association, as the fledgling organization was quickly named. And he made his first big public speech. He had been giving sermons, but this was his first big speech on a semi-political nature. The bus boycott lasted about a year, and eventually the federal government got involved and laws were changed and the boycott won. It was seen as a great success. And then very quickly, because we must move on to the quotes, Martin Luther King then got involved in lots of campaigns for civil rights and across the southern states, and his name spread. And we may know that in August 1963, he made the wonderful I Have a Dream speech in Washington at the end of a march and a great day's events there. He wasn't going to go for the I Have a Dream part, but a gospel singer called Mahala Jackson, called out and said, "Tell them about the dream, doctor," or some versions, "Tell them about the dream, Martin." Either way, her encouragement, he went slightly improvising, remembered a speech he'd previously given, changed it a bit, and that's the ending of what we now call the I Have a Dream speech. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964 in December. Then as the 60s went on, his campaigns grew slightly or broadened out. He had always been keen on nonviolence. He began to speak against Vietnam, began to speak about poverty in the ghettos. And so it was no longer just black rights and civil rights in the racist terms, but in terms of poverty as well, poor and rich. And in April 4th, 1968, he was shot and killed in Memphis, Tennessee. 7 brief thoughts about him. First of all, one of the reasons why he is so well known is that he could speak amazingly well. And if one had to look at a skillful orator, then he would be a very good person to look at. We may know this quote. This is from the Washington speech in '63. "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." And we note the passion, the vision, "I have a dream." We note the personal, my 4 little children. We note the hope will one day live in a nation. We note the anti-racist, they will not be judged by the color of their skin. But we note also the challenge, but by the content of their character. And just in that one quick sentence, he says so much. Whatever of the speeches one looks at, he could speak brilliantly and thought deeply with his team about what would go in it. One of those things was what's sometimes called in the speaking world voice merging. And this is when he would ally his voice with great voices in history, and it meant that he could take people with him. So for the I Have a Dream speech, he starts off, or very near the beginning, 50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. And he's referring to Lincoln. And all Americans, white or black, who were fans of Lincoln would think Martin Luther King is associating what we're doing with what Lincoln did. And that association with good heritage meant that Martin Luther King could take people with him who maybe naturally wouldn't have really realized that Martin Luther King was speaking for the nation, not just one section of the nation. Part of it, and this goes back to the content of their character, is that he took people with him because he had high aspirations for his campaigners. In this little book, we've got the document that if you are wanting to be part of the protest about segregating eating facilities in Birmingham, Alabama in 1963, you'd be asked to sign this, that you would seek to perform regular service for others and for the world, that you would strive to be in good spiritual and bodily health. You would refrain from the violence of fist, tongue, or heart, and so on. And you would sign that pledge. Martin Luther King was keen to encourage all those who are campaigning to aspire to be better people, to show genuine love for their neighbor, black and white. And that encouraging people to step up to the mark was perhaps one of his great gifts. He took people with him, either by appealing to their heritage and saying what we're doing fits into what you've really valued in the past, but also giving them good aspirational stuff. This is the sort of people that you can be. Thirdly, he was very passionate that the means matter as much as the ends. And so therefore, if you're striving for a cause, you have to show good moral behavior on your way. You have to be kind to get to a kind outcome. And as we may know, a big issue for him was non-violence. And his very first speech of the bus boycott, he talked about, let's campaign, let's boycott the buses, but we are not going to be violent. Let's set ourselves apart from that. One of his many quotes about non-violence. Non-violence means avoiding not only external physical violence, but also internal violence of spirit. You not only refuse to shoot a man, but you refuse to hate him. Perhaps for us, as we think about any campaign issues, any personal aspirations that we have, the Martin Luther King emphasis that the means matter as much as the ends, that the means shape the ends, perhaps is something to ponder and remember. Fourthly, people did not like him. And of course, Martin Luther King is held up all over the world now as someone to follow and to look to. But let's remember that he was shot and killed. And let's remember that he was put under immense pressure for much of his campaigning years. He said once, "We shall match your capacity to inflict suffering by our capacity to endure suffering. We will meet your physical force with soul force. Do to us what you will, and we shall continue to love you." And people were doing all sorts of things to him and his fellow campaigners, and sometimes to his family as well. After his Washington speech, a member of the security services wrote this in a report. "In the light of King's powerful demagogic speech yesterday, he stands heads and shoulders over all other Negro leaders put together when it comes to influencing great masses of Negroes. We must mark him now, if we have not done so before, as the most dangerous Negro of the future in this nation from the standpoint of communism, the Negro, and national security." It was often thrown at him that he was a communist. He rebutted that communism is an atheist creed, and you all know that I'm a Christian pastor. It was often thrown at him that he was going to be the one who would stir up lots of trouble. From the other side, from others who felt just as strongly for black rights, there was often impatience about Martin Luther King's non-violence. After the I Have a Dream speech, Malcolm X wrote this: "Whoever heard of angry revolutionaries swinging their bare feet together with their oppressor in lily pad pools with gospels and guitars and I Have a Dream speeches?" Malcolm X and one or two others like him, before they really came to see how much Luther King achieved, felt that this was just a waste of time. Why are we cozying up to the white people if we are going to be proper angry revolutionaries? Let's not be sitting with our bare feet in the lily pads listening to gospels and guitars. It's quite cleverly written, that, but it shows a misunderstanding perhaps of what Martin Luther King was able to do. Moving on. Martin Luther King was full of faith and hope, and this inspired and drove much of his commitment and determination. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. One journalist once said this showed how much Martin Luther King loved nature. That may well be true, but in fact shows more that he knew his Bible, and his speeches were filled with biblical references, and that's inspired and led him to various phrases. But we note the hope that's here. The glory of the Lord shall be revealed. All flesh, black and white, shall see it together. And then a slightly longer extract. One of the issues that he faced were people were saying, how long is it going to take for equal rights really to take root here in the United States? I know you are asking today, how long will it take? Somebody's asking, how long will prejudice blind the visions of men, darken their understanding, and drive bright-eyed wisdom from her sacred throne? Somebody's asking, when will wounded justice, lying prostrate on the streets of Selma and Birmingham and communities all over the South, be lifted from this dust of shame to reign supreme among the children of men? Somebody's asking, when will the radiant star of hope be plunged against the nocturnal bosom of this lonely night, plucked from weary souls with chains of fear and the manacles of death? How long will justice be crucified and truth bear it? I come to say to you this afternoon, however difficult the moment, however frustrating the hour, it will not be long, because truth crushed to earth will rise again. How long? Not long, because no lie can live forever. How long? Not long, because you shall reap what you sow. How long? Not long, because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Words of supreme hope coming from someone of deep faith that there is a God, and one day God will make all right, and the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And one cannot say that if one believes that all we are just atoms and molecules bouncing around. There was a profound faith underneath what Martin Luther King was saying. In his last speech, 3rd of April, 1968, he wasn't prepared to give this speech for various reasons I'll come on to later, but he went automatically back to biblical texts while addressing the sanitation workers. And he said this: the first question which the priest and the Levite asked was, if I stop to help this man, what will happen to me? But the Good Samaritan reversed the question: if I do not stop to help this man, what will happen to him? Imagine being in a Bible study led by Martin Luther King. Imagine sitting, hearing him preach on from the pulpit on some of these passages, brilliant at applying them. And then also from his final speech, I just want to do God's will, and he's allowed me to go to the mountain, and I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. Echoes of Moses, echoes of deep faith. And then our sixth point, we're nearly there. He carried on when things were tough. I mentioned earlier about people not liking him. That was often expressed physically. He had to bring up his little children to recognize that if there was a big thump at the front door, instead of going to see what had been delivered, you ran to the back door, because a big thump meant that someone was very likely to be throwing a bomb at your house. That's quite a big thing for a parent to have to tell little children. So many threats were made about him, so many threats were made family and friends. But also he kept going when things were tough because he himself knew he was flawed. One of his associates said, "I didn't see Martin as a saint, a god, no way, shape or form. I saw him as a man." Martin Luther King got some things wrong. We all get some things wrong. For him, because he was being watched so carefully, especially by J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI, it was known to them he was getting things wrong, especially sexually. And they recorded what he was doing, and they went to various segregationists, in fact, editors in the South, and said, "Look," and they said, "We're not going to publish this because you shouldn't have recorded." And so they went to Martin Luther King and said, "We've got this on you. We want you to stop campaigning." And he said, no, he said, "This is awful, embarrassing, but the campaign goes on." That takes quite a lot of courage, quite a lot of commitment. He said himself, "I am conscious of two Martin Luther Kings. The Martin Luther King that the people talk about seems to be somebody foreign to me." And like everybody, he knew that balance of wanting to do one's best while conscious that one often falls. One often makes mistakes, one often sins. And Martin Luther King had to live with that balance, but very much in the public eye. He also kept going when things were tough, when the non-violence sometimes broke down and there was violence. He found that terribly disappointing. Also, when sometimes governments reacted more slowly than he wished, that was very difficult. He kept going. And to the last point, one of the reasons why he was able to keep going was because he had very good friends around him. And his friends helped him write some of the big speeches. His friends could have a laugh with him. His friends could study the Bible with him. His friends could challenge him, but follow his leadership. And several of them were with him all the way through. On the 3rd of April, 1968 in Memphis, by the evening when Martin Luther King was meant to be giving the speech to the sanitation workers, speech of encouragement, he was feeling particularly low. And he said to one of his really good friends, Ralph Abernathy, he said, "I can't go and do this speech." And Ralph Abernathy went to the venue where the speech was going to be given, and about 20 minutes later sent a message back to the motel saying, "Dr. King, they've come to hear you, not me." Martin Luther King said, "No, I can't do this. I'm feeling too low, too down." And Ralph Abernathy said, "You have got to come and do this speech." And so he did. And because of Ralph Abernathy's persistence, that meant that that speech was recorded. And we've got that great Mountaintop Speech, which I quoted from earlier. Martin Luther King opened the speech by saying this: "Thank you very kindly, my friends. As I listened to Ralph Abernathy and his eloquent and generous introduction, and then thought about myself, I wondered who he was talking about. It's always good to have your closest friend and associate to say something good about you. And Ralph Abernathy is the best friend that I have in the world. I'm delighted to see each of you here tonight, in spite of a storm warning. You reveal that you are determined to go on anyhow." And he then launches into the speech. 7 quick points. My apologies that these Monday evening sessions are always fairly short. And like with all the others, our hope is that it will inspire one or two of us maybe just to go away and read a little bit more for ourselves, or look up clips from his speeches, whatever it may mean for you. He is certainly someone very well worthwhile considering. The 7 points we touched on: a brilliant, extraordinary speaker. Secondly, he had the ability to take people with him by appealing to their heritage, but also encouraging them and challenging them to step up to the mark. Thirdly, he was very conscious that the means as well as the ends needed to be right. Fourthly, he knew what it was not to be liked, to be put under great pressure by his enemies and by some whom he would have considered to have been his friends. Fifthly, he was a person of great faith and hope. and that held him and that kept him going throughout. Sixthly, he was able to carry on when things were tough in his own personal life and also under great pressure from others. And then seventhly, his friends helped him to keep going. He knew what it was to be surrounded by good friends. May we have the grace to gain good friends ourselves, but also to be good friends to others. Thank you so much for listening this evening, or whenever you are watching this. I hope the rest of your day goes very well. Thank you.